is my little baby, and we've just come back from our morning walk. And he has decided that it is cuddle time with Mummy, and so he's sitting on my lap with me at my desk. And unfortunately, he does not want to get down. He does not want to get down, and I have to film right now because it's the only semi-quiet time in the day. So we're gonna have a little special guest sat here with us today. I hope you aren't too distracted by that. He's quite a sweetie. Okay, so for today's video, I thought that we would bring back another episode of the world's most infamous murders. Yeah, I thought we'd bring this one back and jump in with another case. So, I have a few cases written down that I'd like to cover. Okay, so I'm actually going to add in a disclaimer. At the start of these cases, because the cases that we read today, one of them is actually quite brutal, and it does involve crimes being committed against children. So if this is something that you're not comfortable with, or that you quite frankly just don't want to hear about, I completely understand. You may want to skip this video and tune in for the next one. But I hope you enjoy, and see you later. Today we are going to cover the case of the Lethal Cuppa, which is on page 190. Okay, it looks like this is quite a short one, so we might be able to fit another one in as well. But okay, here we go. The case of the Lethal Cuppa. Graham Young. He was the most charming and efficient tea boy. His coffee was good too. But a price had to be paid for it. It cost two people their lives. In April 1971, 23-year-old Londoner Graham Young, who was on a government training course at Slough, Berkshire, answered a help-wanted advertisement in a local paper. It said that John Hadland, manufacturers of specialist high-speed optical and photographic instruments, needed a storeman at their small factory in the Hertfordshire village of Bovington. Young said on his application form that he had previously studied chemistry, organic and inorganic, pharmacology and toxicology over the past 10 years, and had some knowledge of chemicals. He told the managing director, Mr. Godfrey Foster, that before going to the training centre, he had a nervous breakdown after his mother's death, and had had mental treatment. Mr. Foster was sent the report of a psychiatrist who had treated Young. It said that Young had made an extremely full recovery from a deep-going personality disorder and would do extremely well training as a storekeeper. It also said Young was of above-average intelligence and would fit in well and not draw any attention to himself in any community. Okay. The report was hopelessly wrong on all accounts, as Young's workmates were to find out. was 59, and Frederick Biggs, who was 61, head of the Works in Progress Department, as well as storeman driver Ronald Hewitt, who was 41. Rob and Frederick would often lend him cigarettes and money, and Young offered to get tea. Rob and Frederick would often lend him cigarettes and money, and Young offered to get tea and coffee for everyone who was kind to him. Then a strange illness, which was nicknamed the Bovington bug, began to hit the staff at Headlands. About 70 members of the staff went down with the illness, symptoms including diarrhea, stomach pains, loss of hair, and numbness in the legs. Some said their tea tasted bitter, and a medical team was called in to find out if the chemicals used at the factory were responsible. The bug killed 2 members of the staff, the kindly Bob Eggle and Frederick Biggs. Bob died first. He became ill less than a month after Young joined the firm. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he was admitted to hospital. His heart stopped twice while he was in intensive care unit, and he died paralyzed on the 7th of July. Young appeared to be very concerned at Eggle's death and attended the funeral. Then, in September 1972, Frederick was taken ill with stomach pains and vomiting. He died 3 weeks later in a London hospital. When he heard about it, Young is reported to have said, "Poor old Fred, I wonder what went wrong. He shouldn't have died. I was very fond of old Fred." With Biggs' death, panic set in at the factory, and several employees threatened to resign. Ian Anderson, the firm's medical officer, became suspicious when Young boasted about his knowledge of medicine and poisons. Detective Chief Inspector John Kirkland of Hemel Hempstead Police was called in and asked Scotland Yard to check Young's background. When the answer came back, Young was arrested on suspicion of murder. Police found that his bed-sitter was full of bottles containing various chemicals and poisons, and the walls plastered with photographs of his heroes, Hitler and other Nazi leaders. A bottle of thallium, a deadly poison, tasteless and odorless, was found on Young when he was arrested. Young went on trial at St. Albans in July 1972. It took the jury less than an hour to find him guilty of 2 murders, 2 attempted murders, and 2 charges of administering poison. He was jailed for life and placed in a top security hospital, but it was only there that his background came to light. The hospital in which he had been treated for his breakdown turned out to be Broadmoor. In 1962, he had pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey to poisoning his father, his sister, and a friend. Young was, in fact, a compulsive poisoner before he was 15. Mr. Justice Melford Stevenson had committed Young to Broadmoor with the recommendation that he should not be released for 15 years. He was discharged 9 years later as having made an extremely full recovery, and the result was that 2 kindly, innocent men died. That is so unfortunate. Some of these stories are quite horrible. That one there was quite a short story though, so I think we've got time for one more. So let me just have a quick little look and see which one we're after. was the work of a monster, and police immediately launched a full-scale hunt for the killer. They were looking for a grown man, but some cross-referencing in the official files produced the name Jesse Harding Pomeroy, a lad of 14 who has been reprimanded and sent to a special reform school 2 years earlier for beating up young children. Fights amongst youngsters were commonplace, but the name of young Pomeroy, only just out of primary school, had been remembered by the authorities because of the extraordinary amount of unnecessary force he had used. When police called on Jesse Pomeroy, his answers to questioning immediately aroused suspicion. He was arrested, brought to court, and convicted. But Pomeroy's was one of the most remarkable murder cases ever. For though sentenced to die, he was to live for another 58 years, and the first 40 years, until he was 55, was spent in solitary confinement. The American public refused to take a chance on someone who had already displayed the most vicious cruelty. When arrested, he had been at liberty only 60 days after spending 18 months in the Westboro Reformatory. The magistrate who sent him there remarked on the savagery of the beatings he had handed out to children younger than himself, and a short while after his trial for the Millen killing, it was established that just 5 weeks earlier he had killed 9-year-old Katie Curran. He had buried her body in the cellar of a shop. At the Millen trial, Jesse Pomeroy pleaded innocence by way of insanity, but it did him no good. They always try that. It's so awful. He was convicted and sentenced to death. There were those who, because of his age, urged that his death sentence be commuted to life imprisonment, but they were shouted down by the masses, who demanded a swift execution. As it turned out, Pomeroy's life was spared only because of the legal complexities governing death sentences in the state of Massachusetts. Although a judge had passed a sentence of death on him, the law required that the state governor of Massachusetts set the date of execution and sign the death warrant. Governor Gaston, in office at the time, refused, possibly for political reasons, to do anything at all. He would neither sign the death warrant nor commute young Pomeroy's sentence. He compromised with an order signed and sealed that Pomeroy must spend the rest of his natural days in solitary confinement. That order stood until long after Governor Gaston had passed away himself. It was 1916, when Pomeroy was 54, before he was finally released from solitary and allowed to mix with other prisoners at Charleston Prison. He had survived what must have been a superhuman ordeal by burying himself in studies. He read an immense number of books, and he wrote a lot himself. If he had been mad at the time of the beatings, there was no longer any sign of it in his writings in these later years. One of the manuscripts he spawned was an autobiography, which chronicled his early life, the crimes of which he had been convicted, and an attempt he made to break out of jail. Pomeroy died in the prison in which he had spent all his life on the 29th of September, 1932. He was 73 and had spent more than 60 of those years behind bars. That's truly awful. What I stories and do some more stories. I really love reading them. And yeah, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe